Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good. Fantastic. Right, lovely to see you all. As some of you may know, we've had a bit of a change of plan. We've had a last minute change of speaker. So originally it was due to be Joe Turney from the National Trust. That talk will now be rescheduled for a future date, but Hilary Hutson has very kindly stepped in to replace Joe for today, which is brilliant news for us. So so today's talk is from Hilary, as I've mentioned, and the talk is on the topic of the Sheffield Botanic Gardens, and today's talk has been arranged by Evesham Garden and Country Group, so thank you very much to them for arranging that talk. Right then, folks, I'd like to warm you up with a very quick quiz question. So can you name the flower I'm thinking of? Right, so the question is, it's an annual, very highly scented climber that can be sown now to overwinter for early blooms next year. Might be a bit too easy.
Do we all shout out?
I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do the answers at the end. But I just thought I'd put that in there because nobody knows that you can actually sow them now. Most people usually sow them in sort of March time, don't they? Just a couple of things on the Christmas quiz, which is on the 8th of December. We've now got some prizes for the Christmas quiz. We weren't planning to have prizes originally, but we now have. I will confirm those prizes in due course, but we've got some really interesting ones, and we are talking in the hundreds of pounds worth of prizes. So it's really exciting. If you do want to participate, there's going to be two rounds. Just dislocated my microphone. There's going to be two rounds. There's going to be an individual round and then also a group interclub round as well. So you can participate on your own and then you can also participate in your group as well. If you are on your own and not part of a group, then we can allocate you a room with a group of individuals as well. So by all means, you'll be able to join in both. Just a quick tip, if you are going to participate, make sure you've updated your Zoom app to the latest version. It should be at least version 5.8. If anybody wants to know how to do that, ask me at the end and I can explain it to you. We will also do a very brief practice run before the actual event if you just want to just make sure you can get everything working correctly. So we'll let you know what the date of that is before it happens, but obviously that will be before the 8th of December. Right, so a very quick question. How many of you have actually visited Sheffield Botanic Gardens? So I'm going to show it up on your screen as a poll. So the answers are yes, you've been, no, but you do know about it, or thirdly, no, you didn't even know about it. So let's just see how many of you are aware of it. Wow, that's very interesting. So I'm going to share those results with you. So only 2 of you have been. 5 of you didn't. 5 of you haven't been, but do know about it. And 65% of people did not know about it. Wow. So that's really interesting. So thank you for that. I'm now going to hand over to Chaz. Are you there, Chaz? And then you can
Yep, I'm here.
Yourself, and then Chaz can do the introduction. So I'll stop my screen. And then over to you, Chaz.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. First thing I ought to say is Joe Tierney sends his sincere apologies for not being able to come today. He had a family bereavement at the weekend, and it's obviously got other things on his mind at the moment. I'd also like to say, just before I introduce Hilary, if any members of my group can go to the breakout room after the talk, I'd appreciate it. There's a couple of things I want to run by them before the next year, so if you could do that. So very fortunately on Monday, Hilary agreed at short notice to step into Joe's slot today. And Hilary lives in Sheffield, so she knows the gardens very well. She is a botanist. She has 30 years experience of talking to groups about plants and gardens. She's also a very keen photographer, so she uses lots of her own photographs in the talks. And this particular talk was, I believe, just generated last year, presumably because of the lockdown situation, etc. Gave us some time to do it. So it should be fairly up to date, and I hope you find it interesting, because before I'd seen her talk, I did not know about Sheffield Botanical Gardens either. So this is going to be new for me too. So without any more ado, I will hand over to Hilary. Okay, thank you very much.
Brilliant, great, thank you, Chaz. So can I just ask everybody to unmute themselves and give Hilary a lovely warm welcome and round of applause, please.
Okay, lovely. Well, hello everybody, and hello to the two of you who have been to the Sheffield Botanic Gardens. I don't know when you were last here. You may see some quite drastic changes. And to those of you who haven't been, well, if you're ever up Sheffield way, do pop in, because the gardens are a treat. As Chaz said, I live in Sheffield, so they are my local botanic gardens. There's a bus that passes my door every 12 minutes during the day and drops me off at one of the entrances to the Sheffield Botanic Gardens. So it is somewhere that I like to go to frequently. I try to go every month with my camera through the year, and it's based on those photographs that I've made this talk, because I'm going to show you 12 months of colour in the gardens. Something's happened, right. We've gone on to the next slide, which I hope you can all see.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, before I get on to the 12 months of colour, just asking a few questions. What is a botanic garden? Well, back in 1963, the International Association of Botanic Gardens decided that a botanic garden is a place open to the public in which the plants are labelled. I don't think much of that definition, actually. I think that falls far short of what it is. And I've just made a note at the bottom. The words botanic and botanical are interchangeable. Sometimes I use one, sometimes I use the other. So a couple of years ago, the Botanic Gardens Conservation International redefined the botanic garden as a garden that meets certain criteria. So it's not a nice, neat definition, but it does come nearer to what it is. So an underlying scientific basis for the collections. So Sheffield Botanic Gardens certainly ticks that box. In fact, it ticks all the boxes here. Proper documentation of the collections. It's no use having a collection of plants if you don't write about them, document them, see what happens to them, etc. And that goes along with monitoring of the plants in your collections. Adequate labelling of the plants. I think what it might say here is correct labelling of the plants, because unfortunately, even in Sheffield Botanic Gardens, you do sometimes come across a plant which is mislabeled. Open to the public. I didn't realise that was actually one of the criteria, but apparently it is. And very important, communication of information to other gardens, institutions, and the public. So here's a few facts about Sheffield Botanic Gardens. They are pleasure gardens. Most of the public who come here, they just want pleasure gardens. They're not particularly interested in the research and the science. Very importantly, free entry. There's no cost. You can just walk in and out during open hours. And the gardens are just a very lovely place to come, to walk your dog, bring the children, walk around, sit down, have a cup of coffee. I'll come to that later. Sit and read a book. Education is very important. And for as long as I can remember, we have had an education building, but it fell very short of what was really needed. And 4 years ago, the Dorothy Fox Centre opened. This is a state-of-the-art classroom with toilet facilities, a library, cafe. It's just wonderful for all sorts of education. Dorothy Fox, after whom it's named, left a very substantial bequest, which enabled this building to be built. Research, very important. Scientific and horticultural research is carried out at the gardens. We have 3 national plant collections, and a bit more about those later. And like anywhere else, they need to make money to keep running. And so it is a venue for weddings, theatre, concerts, art exhibitions, that sort of thing. The building that you can see here, the central pavilion, is licensed for civil weddings. A few key facts about the gardens. They now comprise 19 acres on a southwest slope. I think a southwest slope must just about be the best thing you can have in a garden, isn't it? They were designed by Robert Marnock. I'll tell you a bit more about him later. They were opened in 1836, so we're coming up for 200 years fairly soon. The glass pavilions are Grade 2 listed. We have 5,000 species of plants, including 3 national collections, Sarcococca and Weigela and Deervilla, which are closely related. And we have a very active team of volunteers known as FOBs, and I've highlighted the letters that give you that name. Now, Sheffield is the only botanical garden in the country to have undertaken a complete restoration. By the end of the 20th century, it was pretty run down, and it certainly needed some tender loving care. And so money was raised. The restored gardens were officially opened by Michael Palin, who is Sheffield born and bred. Not everybody knows that, but he's a Sheffield lad. And they were opened in 2008 when he planted a tree to commemorate the date. They were reconstructed in the spirit of the original garden layout, but also adapted to modern requirements because things have moved on since 1836. They cost £6.69 million. And the funding came from the Heritage Lottery Fund, but it had to be matched by fundraising by the Sheffield Botanical Gardens Partnership. We have a Green Flag Award. I took this photo a couple of years ago, but we have been awarded it for this year as well. And a Green Flag Award is, I'll just have to read my notes here so I get it correct. It's managed by the environmental charity Keep Britain Tidy, and it recognises and rewards well-managed parks and green spaces. Now, Robert Marnock was the person who designed the gardens. He won a competition to design the gardens. And this little garden here, called the Robert Marnock Garden, was not part of the original Botanic Gardens. In the 20th century, some extra land was acquired on the eastern side of the gardens. And this little garden is part of that area that was added in the 20th century. Robert Marnock became the first curator of the gardens in 1836. And this little sheltered garden was opened in 1988 to mark the 150th anniversary. And it's a lovely, quiet, sheltered spot. Since it's over to the side of the garden, it's away from the main part where most of the people, the public, actually go. And so it's not very much used, which is a shame, but it does mean that this is quiet and peaceful, and you're not likely to be overrun by crowds of people in it. And in the Robert Marnock Garden, there's the lovely collection of penstemon, which do very well even into the autumn. And you can see it's autumn because of the colour of the Virginia creeper in the background. Now, the gardens were originally laid out in what's called the gardenesque style. And this means that all the trees and shrubs and other substantial plants are positioned in such a way that you can see the character of each plant. The character is displayed to its full potential. So plants aren't put in straight lines or blocks, but with the trees, you can actually walk around each tree and admire it from every angle. There are winding paths which link the scattered plantings. And you have the creation of small-scale landscapes dotted with features and vignettes, so that there's an idea of variety and mystery. And another feature of the gardenesque style is artificial mounds. We do actually have one mound in the garden near the main entrance. Now here's a map of the garden, and it gives an idea of the winding paths that you can see going around the different areas. Now we can't spend too much time looking at the map, but you can see there are a number of different sorts of garden, and throughout the 12 months that I'm going to show you, we will in fact visit every area at different times of the year. Just a few photos from each area. You can see there are 3 entrances to the garden, and the one at the top, the main entrance, and the one at the bottom, the Thompson Road entrance, are served by buses. So if you did ever want to come and you came by train or by public transport of any sort, there are buses which pass the gardens. So we're going to start in January. And when Robert Marnock designed the gardens, part of his design included a 4-tier fountain at the bottom of the long walk from the pavilions. Now, at some point in history, this fountain disappeared. I don't know what happened to it. But for a while, it was replaced with a circular flower bed full of irises. And then later on, around about 1960, I believe, part of an old war memorial was put up here. But when the restoration took place, it was decided that they wanted a fountain reinstated. And so a new fountain was commissioned and replaced by Christmas of 2004. This is going to be about the only photo you see where the weather is not really nice. Most of the photos show lovely blue skies and sunshine. That does not mean we have lovely blue skies and sunshine all year round in Sheffield. We most definitely do not. It's just that I don't generally go out with my camera if it's not nice weather. I certainly don't take my camera out when it's raining. So some things in flower in January. We've got Garrya elliptica, which is quite a large shrub, often grown against a wall. This gives it a bit of extra protection and warmth, which probably helps it to look nice in January. And you have these lovely catkins, silvery catkins. Garrya comes in either male form or female form. And much like peacocks, it's the male form which is more beautiful. The catkins are just more spectacular in the male form. And if we look closely at the catkins, I really enjoyed taking this photo. I had to take quite a lot before I could get it properly in focus. You can see the little tiny hairs all over it, which give the catkins that lovely silvery look. And you can also tell that it's male because you can see the stamens with the pollen on. And in January, the witch hazels come into bloom. And there's quite a grove of them here amongst some birches. And the witch hazels are known for their wonderful perfume, but I can't smell them. I've no idea whether this is a common feature, whether other people can't smell them. I cannot smell witch hazel, which is a great shame. But they also have quite pretty flowers, you have to admit, including this one, Jelena, which has these flowers which just look like flames flickering, don't they? The name witch has nothing to do with ladies on broomsticks. Witch is an Old English word which means pliable, and it refers to the pliable stems. Now, I might not be able to smell witch hazel, but I can smell this, Sarcococca. And Sarcococca is one of our national collections. It was started by the late John Sterling, and he built up a wonderful collection. In fact, I even helped him to source some of them once. He would source material from all over the world where they were grown, from other botanic gardens. And so this is a nice legacy to him. And they have a very strong honey perfume. In fact, it can be overpowering. I once cut a bunch of Sarcococca stems from my own garden to take indoors. And although I love the perfume, it was just overpowering. I had to take it out again. This is rather a surprise in January. A rhododendron in full bloom, Christmas cheer. I've only ever seen this when the weather's been nice. As I said, I only go out when the weather's nice. I suspect that if we had a very nasty, hard January, those flowers might get rather spoiled. But it is tough and hardy, and it does flower reliably in the winter. Iris unguicularis. I think this is a surprising thing to see in January. It just looks like a spring or summer flower. It comes from the Mediterranean, and it really prefers hot baked position. So if you want to get the best from it in this country, a well-drained bed in a sunny position against a wall would be the best. But if it's happy, it will spread and make a nice clump, and again flower reliably in January. Moving on into February, and we've got the winter aconites. These are a European plant, not native to Britain. And like snowdrops, if you want to plant them, you should plant them in the green, because like snowdrops, they don't do well from dried up tubers or bulbs, but plant them in the green. And if they're happy, they will spread and make a really nice clump. They are also a very important nectar source for any bees that venture out on a mild day in February. Birch Hill is at the higher part of the garden, and it shelters the rest of the garden from northerly winds. As the name suggests, there are a lot of birch trees here. There are one or two other trees as well, and they're underplanted with all these snowdrops, which are naturalizing and getting bigger and better every year. And as I said with the aconites, if you want to plant snowdrops, plant them in the green. In other words, when they're growing, they establish much better. Crocus thomasinianus, some of you may have this in your garden. It's a lovely, reliable, late winter flowering crocus. And if you just leave it and don't deadhead it, it will spread nicely by seed, and you'll end up with a lovely big clump of it. It's named for someone called, he was a botanist called Tomasini, who was the mayor of Trieste. They're native to Eastern Europe. Iris Catherine Hodgkin. This is something which a lot of people grow in a trough garden. It's very happy in those conditions or anywhere in the shade. It does prefer a bit of shade or semi-shade. And it's a hybrid between Iris winogradoi and Iris histrioides. And it's named after the wife of a bulb enthusiast called Elliot Hodgkin. Now, if you get a nice mild February day, what better thing to do than go along to the Botanic Gardens and have a nice quiet seat down under this cherry tree. All I know is it's a Japanese cherry. The label doesn't say any more. It doesn't actually reveal what species it is. Just Japanese cherry, and a lovely, gorgeous pink colour, which is quite an unusual colour in February. I love the hellebores, the hellebore, the oriental hellebores as we know them. As soon as I see the buds forming on these, I know that it's not long till spring. And they have a wonderful collection in the Sheffield Botanic Gardens. Now, they're often called Helleborus orientalis, but in fact, they're nearly always hybrids of the oriental one and other species. So they should properly be called Helleborus cross hybridus. They come in every shade from white through all the pinks, through rosy reds to really dark purplish reds, which are almost black. And if you're growing them at home, it's usually a good idea to cut the leaves off as soon as you see the flower buds emerging. This serves two purposes. It gives a better display on the whole because the flowers haven't got the leaves blocking your view of them. But also, hellebores can get something called leaf spot. And if you cut the leaves off at this stage and get rid of them, it just helps to reduce the amount of leaf spot that the hellebores suffer from. And of course, they're very easy to grow from seed. And if you don't deadhead them, they will seed around and you'll get all sorts of colours coming up. Winter honeysuckle, Linicera purpusei, winter beauty. This is planted in various places around the gardens by paths so that you can appreciate the perfume as you walk through. A number of winter flowering plants are strongly perfumed because perfume carries a long way. And so even if the bees that come out don't see the flowers, they can smell them and follow the scent until they reach the flowers. And so perfume is often a better way for plants to get the insects to come to them in the winter than having brightly coloured flowers. On into March, and now we really start to get colour. These are the Victorian beds near the main entrance at the top of the gardens. And if you look at an old 1863 Ordnance Survey map of the area, you will see these flower beds almost identical to the ones we've got today. The design has changed very little over that time. They are, of course, very high maintenance because the flowers need to be taken out and replanted with each season. And here for spring, we've got polyanthus in white, yellow and blue. And around the edge of each bed, the red flower is a bellis, a double daisy. Coreopsis pauciflora, sometimes called the cowslip bush, because of the colour of the flowers and I think the gentle perfume. It has a gentle perfume. It's actually a member of the witch hazel family. And you can see a bee here making good use of the pollen and the nectar that the flower has to offer in March. Daphne mezereum, thought to be a very rare British native, otherwise it's certainly a European plant. And this is one of the glories of March, I think. It's such a vibrant colour and all those lovely flowers, and they do have a nice perfume. The flowers are then followed by red berries, which look very tasty, but they are incredibly poisonous to humans. However, birds are immune to the poison, and so the birds eat the berries, and then at some point distant from the main plant, they will eventually deposit the seed. Cardamine quinquifolia. This is a close relative of, well, two plants. One of them is that horrible hairy bittercress that is a weed in the garden, and I'm sure you've all got it, a miserable little thing that seeds around before you've even seen it flower. And the other close relative is a cardamine, which is generally known as lady's smock, which is a lovely wild flower you see in damp meadows. So this Cardamine quinquifolia, I've never seen it anywhere else except in the Botanic Gardens, which is a bit of a surprise because I think that looks like a very good garden plant. I would love to get hold of some myself. So I don't know why it's not better known and more widely grown. Digitalis solida, this is something I also grow at home in my garden. This is a member of the poppy family, believe it or not. It's known as a spring ephemeral. It pops up in March, flowers, and then very soon disappears completely below ground. And it disappears down to a little tuber. And these tubers bulk up quite quickly. I planted one in my garden a number of years ago. And about 3 years ago, I decided to dig it up and divide it. And I found over 80 tubers. So I was able to give some to all my friends. I think this is a particularly nice colour form. It comes in whites, various shades of pink, and sort of, I don't like the really much mauvey colours. They're rather a dull mauve, but I think this bright pink is lovely. Now we've got two plants here, Erythronium dens canis, the dogtooth violet, and the blue plant I'll come to in a minute. The Erythronium is the only European dogtooth violet. There are a few from Asia, but the vast majority of them come from North America. But this European one is a real beauty, isn't it? Especially with those lovely leaves, with the colour of the leaves and the stems, sort of picking out the colour of the flowers. As for the blue plant, Scilla section Chionodoxa. Well, some people call it Scilla, some people call it Chionodoxa. There's been some confusion. So the powers that be have now decided that this is its name, Scilla section Chionodoxa. So whether you call it Scilla or Chionodoxa, you're not going to be wrong, or you can just call it Glory of the Snow. And here's another view of the pavilions with a lovely display of crocus in front of them. Now, the pavilions were really the first part of the big restoration, and they were reopened in 2003 by Prince Charles, as you can see. Now, I'd like you to look at the roof. These pavilions are the oldest known curvilinear glass houses in the country. When it came to restoring that roof, I've been told that every single pane of glass is slightly different. There was no one in this country that could make the glass, and so the job was given to a specialist glass company in France, and each pane is handmade. As you can imagine, it was going to be a very expensive job. I don't know how many panes there are, but it runs into several hundred. And there was a scheme whereby members of the public were invited to buy a pane of glass at £25. And so you could buy it for yourself or buy it in memory of someone, and your name would be entered into a book. And so that helped to offset some of the cost. If you go into the pavilions, and unfortunately you can't go into them because of COVID, the main gardens are open, but the pavilions are still, I think, closed because of COVID. But when you can go into them, oh, I just love it. They're a wonderful place to be on a winter's day. And you'll see this, which is Brugmansia Grand Marnier. Grand Marnier being a sort of brandy, I believe. So maybe Grand Marnier is this color. I'm not really very well acquainted with Grand Marnier myself. Now, an interesting fact about Brugmansia, they come from South America. There are 7 species, and not one single species is known in the wild. They have all gone extinct in the wild, but they are kept alive by people growing them in their gardens. Moving on into April, and the gardens have a wonderful area of magnolias. And on a lovely spring day, it's just wonderful to be walking underneath the magnolias. You've got the flowers above you and the petals on the grass underneath. It really is very beautiful, quite special. And one of my favorites is Magnolia stellata. Now, I have the white version at home, which is the commonly grown one. This lovely pink one, I think, is probably called rosea. What a gorgeous color that is, isn't it? Sort of icing sugar pink. Magnolia stellata is quite a compact plant. It's the magnolia to grow if you've only got a small garden. Now we'll have a look at what's known as the Mediterranean climate garden. Mediterranean climate rather than Mediterranean, because the plants in it come from areas of the world that have a Mediterranean climate rather than just around the Mediterranean Sea. Now, a Mediterranean climate is characterized by warm, wet winters and hot, dry summers. Not really what we have in this country. So this area has been adapted to try and make it a more suitable place for growing these plants. So it's on a slope, and a lot of grit and gravel has been dug into the soil to give very good drainage. And fortunately, we do seem to manage to grow quite a lot of plants here, which are of borderline hardiness and which generally survive most winters, such as this acacia. But of course, if we get a really bad winter, we will get a lot of damage done to some of the plants, and they'll have to be replanting. But we haven't had a really cold winter now for about 10 years. So fingers crossed that this one's going to be nice and mild, and things like the acacia will flower. Now over to an area called the Rock and Water Garden. This was not part of the original garden of 1836. This again is in the area of land that was acquired during the 20th century. And here we have a rock feature where there's several pools leading down into the main pool with little waterfalls. And this was built round about 1930 by, where have we got it here? Excuse me, while I just find the details. This was designed by Clarence Elliott, who was a founder member of the Alpine Garden Society. And I think I'm right in saying that it has its headquarters not far from where you're based, in Pershore. You'll probably know more about that than I do. And here we can see Caltha palustris, which is a native British plant. It loves to have its feet in water. And it's very happy here, growing next to the water and the waterfalls. Now we're going to have a look at the long border, as it's known, which houses a collection of North American plants. And here we've got another erythronium. I said most erythroniums are from North America. This one is White Beauty. I think the name sums it up. It absolutely is a beauty, isn't it? And again, you've got those lovely marbled leaves which add to its attractiveness. If this is happy in a sort of shaded or semi-shaded position with enough moisture in the soil and drainage, it will eventually form a very large clump and long-lived. Now, this is a plant that I always try and go to see every year. Lathraea clandestina. It's a strange plant because it is a total parasite. What you see is what you get. There are never any stems or leaves. There's no green part of it, no chlorophyll. It can't grow in soil as normal plants do. It has to grow by attaching itself to the roots of a host plant. In this case, it's attached to the roots of a black poplar. It particularly likes poplars, willows, that sort of thing, but it is in fact seen on a number of different plants. So, you know, you can try growing it on any sort of tree or shrub. You can actually see where the roots of the tree are because you can see lines of this plant growing. So even if you can't see the root of a tree, you can tell where it is because of this plant growing on it. If you want to try growing it yourself, you have to get hold of some seed or a part of the plant from someone else. And then you have to expose the root of your chosen host plant. And if it's a piece of plant you've got, you push that plant hard up against the root. Or if it's seed, you sprinkle the seed directly onto the root. And then you put the soil back and you walk away and keep your fingers crossed. And if it takes, then in a few years, you will get some flowers like this. Now, I took this photo a couple of years ago, and very soon afterwards, I learned that the plant had died. We're into May now, and this is a plant whose name begins with a plus sign, plus Labernocytisus adamii. And as I've put there, RIP, it's dead. It is laughing. I don't think that's funny. Not for the tree anyway. This plant is known as a graft chimera, and it first arose getting on for 200 years ago in France. It was very fashionable at the time to take a laburnum rootstock and graft a piece of a broom or cytisus onto the top. So you would have a laburnum stem about 4 feet long, 4 feet tall, and on the top you would have broom. And normally, when you planted it, all you ever got to see was the broom in the spring. But on this particular occasion, something must have gone wrong with the graft because something rather peculiar happened. The resulting plant produced yellow laburnum flowers, as you can see. It produced purple cytisus flowers, And I can't actually see any of those in this particular shot. And then it produced a profusion of pink flowers, which are a mixture of the yellow laburnum and the purple cytisus.
Wow.
This is not a hybrid, because with a hybrid, you get a combination of genes. It's a genetic thing. This is not a hybrid, it's a chimera, because what's mixing together is the cells of the laburnum with the cells of the broom to give this pink part. But it's the most peculiar plant. Some people actually absolutely hate it. I love it. I think it's such a curiosity, and I'm very sad that it's died. Weigela. We have the National Collection of Weigela. Weigelas come from Asia. They're in the honeysuckle family, but they don't have perfume. And the flower color ranges usually from white through pale pink, deep pink, to a really deep rosy red and yellow. Weigela with Middendorfiana, this gorgeous yellow and orange flower. I just think that looks so tropical. It just does not look like something that you'd be able to grow in this country. It's totally hardy. Being given the name mango, which again makes it sound a bit more tropical. I think that is really gorgeous. And Gunnera tinctoria. We're back in the rock and water garden now. And this is the Gunnera just beginning to grow and open up. As you know, Gunnera leaves eventually become absolutely enormous. You can actually stand under them and shelter from the rain. Now, Gunneras have to grow in wet areas because they don't actually have sort of wood to support them. It is the water which they take up which gives them the support. So you can see from the size of them, to have that sort of a leaf and stem supported by water, you've got to have a lot of water. And they have very unusual flowers. From a distance, the flower looks like an enormous fir cone. But then if you look closely, the photo on the right, if you look at the individual little flowers, there are thousands of them, you can see some of the flowers opening up to show the pollen inside. In Cheianthus, I've put campanulatus. It says in brackets or perulatus, but perulatus has white flowers. Perulatus is the label on this plant in the garden, unless they've changed it recently. But as I say, perulatus has white flowers, so I think it's actually campanulatus, which has these gorgeous pink flowers. It's in the rhododendron and heather family, so it likes an acid soil. Who doesn't love a blue poppy? I think it's the sort of flower that just everybody says they love. Now, we've got this one down as Meconopsis fertile blue group. Synonym, Meconopsis cross-sheldonii. Well, Meconopsis cross-sheldonii is a hybrid that was made several decades ago, but it's thought that the original plant probably doesn't exist anymore because it's been cross-pollinating and cross-pollinating over the decades. So now it's simply just known as the fertile blue group. But whatever it's called, it has got that gorgeous blue that very few plants have. Primula japonica. The name tells you it comes from Japan, where it does, and it grows in very wet places there. It can range in color from white through pink to really deep cerise, as you can see here. And if you grow them together, then they will cross-pollinate, and you'll get every color that's here and all the shades in between. If you want to keep a particular color form, you need to grow it separately. Now, this is something that we don't have much at the moment because of COVID. Good old days pre-COVID, I've put there. Yes, we used to have regular plant sales as a way of raising money. This year, because of COVID, the plant sales have continued, but they haven't been at the gardens. They've been in individual people's private gardens. I went to one a few months ago, and the nice thing is you get to go around the person's garden as well. So the plant sales have continued, but hopefully they will eventually return to the Botanic Gardens. And there you can get a wonderful range of interesting plants that you can't always buy at the garden centres. On into June, and we're going to have a look now at the Bear Pit. The Bear Pit is a listed building, and it was built at the same time as the rest of the gardens in 1836. And originally it housed 2 living bears, because in Victorian times it was considered okay to do things like that. There is a story that in 1870 a little boy fell into the pit and was mauled to death by the bears. This story is not true. It can't be true because the bears actually had been moved out 11 years earlier. So although a child may have fallen into the pit, he wasn't mauled by bears. Nowadays, we've got a statue there, a lovely sort of life-size bear statue, which the children love to go and pat. And in front, we've got this rather nice rhododendron. I think the white is probably a spirea, but I'm not entirely sure what it is. And a rather nice fern as well in the middle of the picture. I haven't yet identified what the fern is. Now we're going to have a look at the evolution garden. And as you go through the evolution garden, it tells the story of the evolution of plants from early plants right up into the wonderful diversity we have today. And the centerpiece of the garden is this fossil that you can see, which is known as Stigmaria. Now, Stigmaria, this particular one was excavated from a railway cutting in about 1875. And it was brought into the Sheffield Botanic Gardens in the 1980s. Stigmaria are a type of branching tree root fossil from the Carboniferous period. Now we're going to have a look at the woodland garden, which in this photograph, as you can see, is full of wonderful different coloured aquilegias. There's been a lot of work going on here, and I don't think those aquilegias are there anymore. They've been redeveloping it and planting it with something else. But I do love aquilegias, all the different colours. And of course, if you grow them, they hybridize and you never know what colour's going to come up. Now a look at this wonderful wisteria growing on what is called the curator's house. It was originally the house where the curator lived. Now it is a cafe. Added onto this, we have a conservatory area where there's tables and chairs, and there's a terrace outside. So you can have your coffee either in the curator's house, in the conservatory, or outside on the terrace. Except now, of course, with COVID, the buildings are closed. You can still get your coffee through a hatch or your meal, but you have to sit outside on the terrace to eat it, which is a great shame. I have been brave enough to sit there in the drizzle one day, actually having my coffee. I was determined to have a coffee. So I put my umbrella and sat outside with my coffee in the drizzle. The wisteria is absolutely beautiful. As you can see, it's been trained around the windows. It's a lovely sight. Now, in a row in front of the pavilions are 8 cast iron urns. These date from when the garden was first opened, but then during the Second World War, they disappeared. I presume they were put into storage and possibly forgotten about. And then when the gardens underwent their restoration, they were found and brought out and given a lick of paint. And so we now have the 8 original urns in their original place. And you can compare it with a photo from the early 1900s, where it looks to me as though those urns are actually black. So they've been repainted to make them lighter. Moving on into July, we're going to look at the rose garden. This was restored along with the rest of the gardens, looking at Robert Marnock's original design. The centerpiece is a statue of Pan, the spirit of the woods, not Peter Pan, as some people say. It's Pan, spirit of the woods. And then the roses are arranged from the center out. In the center, you've got the older roses. And then as you move out towards the edge, you get the more modern hybrids. So it tells the story of the history of the rose. This is another part of the area that was added in the 20th century, and it's a very sheltered area known as Osborne Field. And a few years ago, very recently in fact, it was decided to build a new feature here, featuring only plants from South Africa. So this is the new South African bed. So you've got this wonderful wall, stone wall at the back, which will hold heat from the sun and give heat out in the evening and nighttime. The bed is raised, so you've got good drainage. And then it's been planted up with plants all grown from seed by a couple known as Peter and Trish Cohn. And the plants have been raised from seed collected by Rod and Rachel Saunders. They were a couple who used to run a nursery in South Africa, in Cape Town, called Silver Hill Seeds. Now, this couple made headline news in 2018 because Rod and Rachel Saunders were out plant collecting in South Africa, and they were set upon and murdered by terrorists. So this bed, I believe, is being dedicated to their memory. Looking at a few of the plants from South Africa, they only grow species plants here. They don't grow hybrids of the plants, only species. So these are species Diacias. Diacias make wonderful garden plants, I find. A lot of them are pretty hardy. I grow some on the patio, which I get every year, but a number of them remain in the garden all through the year. I love Diacias. Now we're going back to the Mediterranean climate garden to have a look at callistemon. Callistemons come from Australia. They're known as bottlebrush trees or bushes. And here's one in full bloom, looking very happy. And over to the right of the plant, behind those benches, you can see the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It's actually an echium. The echium, these tall echiums come from the Canaries. This one looks as though it's finished flowering and going to go to seed. It also looks as though it's about to topple over any minute. Still in the Mediterranean garden, Beaumaria. I think this one is Hertella. Some of the Beaumarias are too tender for us to grow in this country outside, but this one is hardy. It has tubers which get down into the ground nice and deep, so they're protected from the winter weather. Now, Beaumarias are basically climbing alströmerias. You may grow alströmerias in your garden, but even if you don't, you'll know them from the flower part of a supermarket, because wherever there's cut flowers on sale, there are alströmerias. They're very long lasting in a vase of water. A rather strange feature of alströmerias and Beaumarias is the leaf. Next time you have an alströmeria stem in front of you, look at the leaf. The leaf goes through a 180-degree twist as it comes off the stem. So the upper surface of the leaf is actually the lower surface of the leaf. Why it does this, I have absolutely no idea. And as far as I know, it's unique to the alströmeria family. Also in the Mediterranean garden, we have some of the foxgloves from Mediterranean parts of the world. This one is Digitalis, formerly Isoplexis sceptrum. I can't actually see the names on my slides because something is covering the top, but I think this one is sceptrum. Let me just check. Yes, Isoplexis sceptrum, now known as Digitalis sceptrum. This one is native to Madeira. Not particularly hardy, but it does manage to survive at least some years in the Mediterranean garden in Sheffield. And this is Digitalis canariensis. I've seen this growing in Tenerife. It's native to Tenerife and La Palma. I don't know what's happening to it in La Palma at the moment because, of course, that volcano is still erupting madly. But it comes from the Canaries. Moving on into August, we're going to have a look at the long borders on the broad walk. This walk leads down from the pavilions down to the fountain, which I showed you earlier. And there are two very deep borders, which are almost mirror images of each other. They don't religiously mirror each other, but they do seem to reflect each other. Up near the pavilion are the stronger colours. And then as you get down towards the fountain, the colours become softer and more muted, following one of the ideas of Gertrude Jekyll. And as well as a few shrubs, we see here a buddleia. There are herbaceous perennials, and there are quite a lot of ornamental grasses. And the ornamental grasses are left during the winter, and they do sort of add structure and colour and movement to the beds during the winter months. Now we'll have a look at what's known as the Prairie Garden. Now, you all remember the London Olympics from 2012. Well, the planting in the gardens at the London Olympics was designed by two professors from Sheffield University, Professor Nigel Dunnett and Professor James Hitchmore. They are in the University of Sheffield Department of Landscape Design, and they did a wonderful job at the Olympic Gardens, what am I calling it? The Olympic Games Gardens in London. I think they were very well acclaimed. People thought the gardens were absolutely wonderful. And the gardens were done at the Olympic Games in a sort of prairie style. And in the Sheffield Botanic Garden, the two professors did a sort of a dummy run, if you like, a few years before. They built from scratch this garden area, planted it up with prairie plants to monitor it and see how it would work. It obviously worked very well because they used the idea when they did the Olympic Park. Here we've got Eupatorium maculatum, which is from North America. And it likes a boggy condition, actually, although here it hasn't got a boggy condition and it's looking quite happy. Heleniums. A lovely stand of heleniums. You can see the bee likes it. And they're often called sneezewort because apparently you can make a sort of snuff from the leaves. Another look at the Mediterranean climate garden, because I'm particularly looking here at Melianthus major, the large shrub with the divided leaves on the right of the picture. These lovely sort of glaucous, bluey, silvery leaves. This used to be grown as a conservatory plant, but over the last few decades, people have been trying it out outside and find that it's actually pretty hardy. I've had them growing in my garden now for about 20 years. And they've come through the worst of the winters. And behind the Mediterranean garden, there's this wonderful stand of Lobelia tupa. This is a South American lobelia, quite unlike those little bedding blue lobelias that we grow. This one can grow up to 10 feet, 12 feet even, if the conditions are right. And it's native to Chile. And it has a common name of devil's tobacco, because if you smoke its leaves, you will have a, how shall I put it, an interesting experience. Yes, it's hallucinogenic. It can also be used to treat nicotine addiction, apparently.
How often did you say you visit the gardens, Hilary?
I grow my own Lobelia tupa. I don't need theirs. And here's a wonderful plant, which I think is so beautiful and looks so delicate, although it's actually a thug. This is the California tree poppy. It is a perennial from California. And in California, it grows in dry canyons and scrub. which it hasn't really got here, but as I say, it spreads aggressively through sort of underground rhizomes. So you do have to be careful where you put it. It's a big plant, it's tall, it can get to 8 feet. But I think the poppies are absolutely delicious. Still in the Mediterranean climate garden, we've got Agapanthus africanus. Now, Agapanthus comes in 2 forms. Do you want me to speed up, by the way? I've just seen what the time is.
Oh, no, don't worry. You're okay.
Okay. Agapanthus comes in 2 forms, really. There are evergreen and deciduous. The deciduous ones are totally hardy in the UK, pretty well everywhere. The evergreen ones generally aren't, and people tend to grow the evergreen ones in pots and move the pots under cover for the winter. But here we have an evergreen one, which is left out all year and seems perfectly happy. Moving on into September, and we're going to look at the AGM border. AGM stands for Award of Garden Merit. It's an RHS award, and it's a mark of quality awarded to garden plants which have done well in trials. And the point is to judge the plant's performance under various UK growing conditions. And if it passes, then it gets an AGM added to its name. Another look at the Prairie Garden, which by this time, by September, is beginning to go over and run to seed. Now, the idea is that you leave the seed to fall on the ground. In nature, that is what would happen in a prairie, that the plants would die back in the winter and the seed would regenerate the following year. Although the plants are, many of them at least, are even perennial. What they do here is every spring they actually burn it all off, and this gets rid of any weeds, and then it allows the prairie plants that they want, there's about 30 species planted here, to regenerate. Another quick look in the Robert Marnock garden, where we've got this lovely Hylotelephium. I still prefer the old name of sedum. I think this one is probably called Madrona. And a Stipa tenuissima, known as ponytails. I think you can see why it gets that name. It's a lovely grass that sort of, because it hasn't got any strong colour itself, you can mix it in with all sorts of other plants to give texture and movement. Just looking at some of the plants which are doing their best in September, we have Kurangeshima palmata. This plant comes from Japan, and it's one of the very few plants whose botanical name is actually the Japanese name. In Japanese, apparently, Kurangeshima or Kurangeshima comes from 2 words, ki, meaning yellow, and the rest of the name, Engeshoma, I don't know how they pronounce it, refers to another plant which grows in Japan, which has similar looking flowers, but in a different color. It's a totally unrelated plant, but they say that this plant looks like that plant, but it's yellow, and hence its name. This is a woodland plant. It likes dappled shade, sort of a nice shelter position so that it can do its best, but it is hardy. On into October, when the leaves come down, and here's one of my grandchildren a few years ago having fun kicking through all those leaves which have been swept up. I quite like doing that myself, actually, when no one's looking. And here we've got one of the colchicums. This one's water lily. They have a number of colchicums in the garden, white ones as well as these mauve ones, especially quite a large collection in the rose garden. Colchicums are just one of the most poisonous plants on the planet. The poison comes from a substance that they contain called colchicine. And what colchicine does is it disrupts your DNA. So if you happen to get colchicine in your body, it disrupts your DNA, which means that your body can't function. So it's incredibly poisonous, but you have to admit, incredibly beautiful. Nerine. Baudenii is really the only one which is reliably hardy in this country, and then it needs the right conditions. my next door neighbor, who is right next door to me, she has a wonderful patch of nerines, which I see every time I go out in my garden. And her patch of nerines is about 10 feet away from my garden. And her patch gets bigger and better every year. And I just can't grow them. So, you know, they're very, very fussy. She's just got exactly the right conditions and I haven't. Now we're going to look at the Four Seasons garden, which I think are at their best in the late summer and autumn, and they are tucked away behind the pavilions. Now, because of their position, this is a cold area. The pavilions shade the garden, and they also create a bit of a wind tunnel. So the plants here have to be pretty tough, but by golly, they do give a wonderful show of colour. And along in the Four Seasons garden is this wonderful tree, Cornus Norman Haddon. This Cornus dogwood is a hybrid of, let me get it right, a hybrid between Cornus cusa and Cornus capitata. And the tree was found by a man called Norman Haddon in the 1960s in the woodland around his garden in Somerset. And as well as the flowers, which are the normal dogwood flowers in the spring, you get these amazing strawberry-like fruits which hang on through the autumn. I think if I could only plant one tree in my garden, it would have to be this. Unfortunately, I don't at the moment have space for another tree in my garden, but if anything dies and leaves a space, this is what I'm going to put in it. On into November, and the leaves are really turning colour now and dropping. Here's a gorgeous Acacia just hanging on to the last few days of its lovely red leaves. And I showed you the Enkianthus earlier on in flower. This is what it does in the autumn. Wonderful bonfire colours, just for a few days. They don't last for very long, and then they fall. Back in the Four Seasons garden, if you're walking along and you look up above you, you will see this way above your head. Aralia elata. Elata means tall, and it certainly is tall. In the summer, it has large heads of small white flowers, very frothy looking. And then by autumn, those flowers are turning to these black berries with the lovely red stems. I think it's very attractive. And of course, the birds come along and eat the berries and spread the seed. And here we have a blackbird doing exactly that with Calicarpa. Calicarpa bodneri profusion. Now, many Calicarpas have a problem in that you need two plants in order to get cross-pollination to get the berries. But this variety, profusion, will set berries just by itself. I grow this in my garden and it's the only one I have, and I get a wonderful supply of berries every year. The blackbird's really sort of just about to feast on these, and they are a wonderful colour, aren't they? We don't get many things with that sort of colour berry, not that colour in autumn. Prunus caerula. This really looks at its best in autumn when the leaves have fallen and you can really appreciate the bark. And you just feel that you want to tweak some of those little loose pieces and give it a rub and a polish. In the spring, it has normal white cherry flowers, but it's really grown for its wonderful bark. And we have a grass garden, a lovely collection of grasses which look wonderful at this time of year, especially with that backdrop of the beach going a lovely bronze colour. And we have plenty of these, and they're cheeky and they're very tame, and they will run up to you wanting food as you go through the garden. A lot of people do feed them, and so they have become very tame. And finally into December. And once all the leaves have fallen from the trees, you can really get the idea of the garden-esque style where the trees are planted, so you can see the form and shape of each tree, and you can walk around them and just admire the sort of the architecture of the trees. But there's still some flowers up in the Mediterranean garden. We've got this coria giving this wonderful pop of colour, sort of rainbow, almost pink and yellow. And this is a plant which flowers reliably in December, Mahonia Lionel Fortescue, and it has an AGM, as you can see. Now, I had to look up Lionel Fortescue to see why it was called after him. This is a close-up of the flowers. Now, Lionel Fortescue was a notoriously exacting plantsman, and apparently he was so obsessive about colour that he was known to tear out clumps of Himalayan blue poppies if they weren't quite the right shade of blue. I can't imagine tearing out a blue poppy, even if it was the colour blue was a bit off. I think I would just leave it. Anyway, whether or not he approved of this yellow, I don't know. A quick look back in the pavilions. As I say, it's a wonderful place to be in midwinter. And you've got this Leonotus leonurus, which is a South African plant. And the flower colour and the tubular shape of the flower show how it has co-evolved with African sunbirds, which have curved beaks, exactly the right length and shape to get the nectar from the flowers. And you'll also see these little sachets hanging from various branches as you walk through the pavilions. And this is biological control of pests. There are tiny little mites in there which come out and gobble up some of the nasty things that would otherwise damage the plants. Back outside to finish off with, Viburnum opulus xanthocarpum. That simply means yellow berries. A form of the more usual red-berried Viburnum opulus or Gelder rose. And there it is next to a red-berried version of the same thing. And again, you can see the garden-esque style of the layout of the gardens. And I'll finish with a cheesy sunset.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hilary. It was a wonderful tour of 12 months through Sheffield Gardens. So that was really interesting. Right, folks, if you've got any questions, you can either use the chat box at the bottom of the screen or use the raise your virtual hand function, and I can unmute you and then you can ask a question, or you can wave at the screen. I should be able to see you today. So if you've got questions, let us have them. Hilary, the calicarpa that you had in your garden, what position have you got it in to be able to get so many berries on it? Because I don't seem to do it very successfully.
The one in my garden at home?
Yeah.
The one in the Sheffield Gardens is out in the open. My one at home is actually against a garage wall. It gets late afternoon sun in the summer. The rest of the year it's pretty well shaded most of the time. Oh, it gets very early morning sun as well. But most of the time it's actually in shade, and it's I say it's up against my next door neighbour's garage wall actually. It just seems to be a very undemanding, easy plant. I don't give it any special treatment.
All right, okay, so it doesn't need too much sun then? Apparently
not, no.
Okay, I'm clearly doing something wrong with mine. And the plant that you mentioned earlier with the plus sign, is there any other plants out there that start with a plus? Because that might be a nice quiz question.
I don't know. Any plant that counts as a graft chimera, which is where you've grafted one plant onto another and then the cells have mixed to give you this weird effect, that will start with a plus sign, but I cannot think of any at the moment. It's the only one I know of at the moment.
All right, okay. Right, I might have to say that for a quiz question for December. In fact, another quiz question is, you talked about the plants where they twist 180 degrees.
Oh, the alströmerias, yes.
Yeah, there is a word for it.
Oh, is there?
There is, yeah. I'm not going to tell you now because it's part of my quiz questions. For
right. I'll have to Google it later because I'd like to know that word.
But it does also happen to orchids.
Really? I never knew that. I always thought it was exclusive to alströmerias. So not all orchids, though?
I don't know. I'm not sure if it's every orchid. I think it might just be a certain selection of varieties or species. But I'll try and find out before December and the quiz. but there is a term for it. A term.
I'm going to have to do some Googling.
So everyone who's here today might be able to get a bonus point by the time we get to December. Fantastic. And the gardens are free entry. So how is it
Yes.
funded? Overall, I mean, is it mostly volunteers that work there, or how do
Well, there are a lot of volunteers. Yes, I mean the gardens wouldn't function without the volunteers. There is. I don't understand the funding completely. There is a trust which manages the gardens, which presumably uses some council money. I don't really know, to be honest. But as I say, they do have these functions like weddings and art exhibitions, where, if you're going to have a wedding there, presumably you have to hire the pavilion to pay for that. And they do, when they have things like theatre and art exhibitions, there is paid entry to those. So, but the gardens themselves are free.
Yeah, well, that's really surprising, because I mean, for it to be, is it 19 acres? I think you said it's a huge,
Yes,
huge garden. For it to be open free,
yes.
it's about half the size of Cambridge Botanic Gardens, and that's you have to pay to get into that as well.
You do, don't you? Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes, I don't really understand how the funding works nowadays, but they certainly are completely free. But as I say, when there's a special event on, you have to pay to go into that.
Yeah. Okay. And that Lathraea clandestina.
Yes, the parasite.
Yeah, that was really interesting. But I had a quick look on the internet, and I can't seem to find it available anywhere. No seeds or anything. So it's obviously.
I think Chiltern Seeds have sometimes offered it. I've never tried it myself. I have grown another total parasite, which is Orobanche hederae, and I think I got the seed from Chiltern Seeds for that.
Right.
And that's something that grows on common ivy. And again, you just expose the root, put the seed on, cover it up with soil and walk away. And that grew. In fact, I'd forgotten all about it until 2 or 3 years later, when I was walking past the ivy on the wall in my garden, and I could smell honey. And I thought, where on earth is that honey smell coming from? And so I sort of had a close look, and I discovered that the Orobanche was in fact in full flower in my garden. And I'd completely forgotten that I'd sown seed there.
And that's Orobanche, is it?
Orobanche hederae.
Hederae.
Yes.
And the scent.
Ivy broom rape, I think it's known as.
Ivy broom rape.
Yeah. So that's certainly not difficult to grow from seed. And the principle is the same with the Lathraea seed, if you can get hold of the seed.
Yeah, Chiltern's. Okay.
I think it was Chiltern, yeah.
And when you say it was scented, is it a nice scent, or is it an unpleasant one?
The Orobanche, well, it's honey. It
Honey,
smells of honey. Yes.
Fantastic.
I don't think the Lathraea has a scent. I don't remember having a scent when I've been to see it.
Well, even if it did, I guess it'd be quite tricky, because you'd have to get on your hands and knees to be honest.
Yes, and that's something I don't do very often these days, if I can help it.
And you mentioned earlier about the witch hazels that you couldn't smell. I believe Helena is not scented, or very minimally scented, if at all. So that might be one reason.
But I can't smell the common ones either. The yellow ones,
right.
I can't smell any of them.
Oh wow. Okay. There's in fact, we were talking about this on one of our last Zoom meetings. Actually, there's a national collection down in Kent called the Witch Hazel Nursery, and they've got fields and fields of them. So you're absolutely smothered in the scent as you're walking through. So it's definitely one to go and visit at some point. And also, you talked about the hellebores as well. So Sheffield's got a good collection of those. There's also a national collection, if anybody wants to see them, at Ashwood Nurseries.
Yes,
John's Garden.
They've done a lot of breeding, haven't they?
They have, yeah, fantastic amount. And there's also one in Stoke-on-Trent, which is by Mike Byford, Hazel Cross Farm Nursery. He's got a collection as well. So if anybody wants to go and see those, it's worth a trip. So has anybody else got any questions, folks? If you have, you can wave at the screen or use the chat box, whichever you want to. If not, then that might be it for today. I think
there's a comment coming up.
Helen wants to ask a question. Helen, do you want to unmute yourself?
It isn't a question. I just wanted to say it was absolutely fantastic talk. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's up there at the top of my favourites. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment.
Thanks, Helen. And Deborah's also written a lovely comment in the box as well, that you can see. Is that it for questions? I'm just going to check on. There's also been another comment that's come through from Mark saying thanks for the talk. Very relaxing experience. Really enjoyed your creation of the Sheffield Botanic Gardens. So I think, yeah, it's been thoroughly enjoyed by everybody. Right, well, I think that's about it for questions then, Hilary. So that was a fantastic talk. I think you can see from the comments and what people have said, it has been really interesting. And the photos as well were fantastic. And I really like that one about the Gary elliptica. And I've never really looked at something like that in that close of detail. So that was really interesting, and you took us through the history as well of Sheffield Botanic Gardens, which was really interesting, and hopefully more people will now visit it. I mean, 65% of people didn't even know about it. I mean,
well, you do now.
yeah. I mean, there's lots of gardens out there that we haven't had a chance to visit. I'm sure we'd all want to, but to not even know about it is a real surprise. But yeah, so obviously everybody here today definitely knows about it. So if you can go make a visit, and it's free, I mean, you can't argue with that, can you? And I think by the sounds of it, winter might be a perfect time. If you've got the National Collection of Sarcococcus, the Christmas box, they're wonderfully scented. So, you know, a walk around the gardens must be fantastic during the winter. So yeah, definitely worth going to make a visit. So right, folks, can I ask you all to unmute yourselves, please? So just press the button on the screen, and then can I ask you all to give Hilary a lovely round of applause and say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Hilary. Right, folks, I'm just going to give you the final slide with the dates of the next meeting.
And the quiz.
Oh, and the quiz answer, yes. I'm glad some people look forward to it. Right, so we have got a reps meeting next Wednesday. If anybody wants to come along and find out a bit more about tender shoots, because the whole reason this works is by clubs working together. So if you do know anybody from a club who wants to get involved to help us put the plan together for 2022, that would be fantastic. And you get to meet all the other representing clubs as well. So the next talk is on the 11th of November on the topic of winter thrillers, and that's from a chap called Doug Stewart. He's a really fantastic guy, incredibly funny. He's on BBC Humberside. He's a lecturer, incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly funny. So definitely worth coming along for that one. So yeah, do join us on the 11th of November. Then we've got the Christmas quiz on the 8th of December, like I mentioned, and it's got an individual round, so you can just turn up on your own, as well as a group round. We will have a test run before the 8th of December, so I'll let you know on email when that's going to be. So make sure you're on our distribution list to find out about that. Quiz answer then. So oh yeah, I will open the breakout rooms in a moment as well after the quiz. So name the flower I'm thinking of. It's an annual plant, a climber, very highly scented, and it can be sown now. Most people usually sow it around about sort of March time in the spring.
Sweet pea.
Oh,
Lathy Russ. Lathy
yes,
Russ.
yes, yes. Sweet.
Oh, yeah, posh.
Yes, well done, well done. I mean, I've left mine out in the cold in pots over winter, and it's been absolutely fine. So they're pretty hardy. You know, they don't need to be kept indoors, so definitely worth giving a go. And then you get early blooms before anybody else. So yeah, well done, well done. I'll make it harder for next time. In fact, no, I'm saving all the hard ones for December. Right then, folks. So I'll say goodbye to anybody who wants to leave now. For those who want to stay behind, I'll be opening up the breakout rooms in a second. See you in a couple of weeks.